That is number 409.
What? It is? Where's, yeah. Huh. They're on, yeah, they're just tipped. Huh. I thought it for a split second and I was like, what am I thinking? That's not her. No, he knows. For a split second and that's why I must be crazy thinking that. God, she looks so different. That's crazy. There's another hole, yeah. Oh, that's
Hi everyone, this is Mike Fitz, a fellow with Explore.org and the Bear Camps, and I'm thankful you can join me this afternoon. It's a beautiful afternoon here at Brooks River. I'm standing on an elevated wildlife viewing platform here near the mouth of Brooks River, and there are many bears around me. So over the next hour or so, I'm just going to be talking about the bear and salmon activity that we see here, try to give you a better understanding of the behavior of these animals, why they might be here, what they're doing at the time. We've seen some others with cubs this afternoon, including spring cubs, yearling cubs, so hopefully those will stay within our line of sight. And we'll talk about whatever else happens to come our way. So let me step behind the camera and point it towards some bears, and we'll see what happens. And I am on a public wildlife viewing platform, so you will hear other people talking from time to time. You may hear some camera shutters popping as they are trying to photograph a lot of the bears that are in this area. I won't be monitoring the questions on Explore.org. If you are in the chat there and you're wondering about certain bears or anything like that, because I would just be focused on driving the camera and narrating the action. But hopefully I'll be able to answer a lot of the basic questions you have about the brown bears that we see during this broadcast. In fact, I wanted to go down the river right away towards Knack Neck Lake in the mouth of the river, because we have a mother bear with 3 spring cubs that has been fishing and resting in this area for much of the afternoon. So this is number 482. She's an experienced mother. This is at least her 3rd litter that I know of, and she has 3 cubs of the year. So these cubs of the year, or spring cubs, were born this past winter, so they're about 9 months old right now, and we're probably just going to get a glimpse of her as she's moving into the trees. Don't think she's maybe going to stick around all that long, but maybe she'll come back out. The spring cubs look fairly small compared to the larger bears that we have in this area. When they're born in the dens, they're only about a pound, so they've grown significantly since then. And as they move out of our line of sight, they might be going into the forest to rest for a period of time. But if they come back out, and you get a good look at them on the cams, you may be able to notice that they have very different colorations in their fur. One of them is very, very blonde, one of the blondest bears I've ever seen. So individual bears, just like people, have genes that affect their fur color, and that bear may not keep that fur color as it ages, because fur on the bears tends to darken as they mature. But I'll be looking downstream from time to time to see if those bears reappear. But right now, down below us is one of the more recognizable adult female brown bears that we have here at Brooks River. And again, I'm coming to you live from Brooks River in Katmai National Park, Alaska. I'm about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage. This is number 409, Bead Nose. She is a very experienced bear in her early 20s. She's visited Brooks River every year, really, since she was first identified as an independent bear, and that was, I think, as far back as 2001. I recognize her by her distinctively blonde ears. She has a very upturned muzzle. She's also very fat at this time of the year. She might go right under the bridge. This is the floating bridge. This is the only dry way to cross Brooks River, so you either have to swim, get in the water with some waders, if you want to cross it otherwise. She knows she can slip right through the pontoons that it's floating on. And she's giving us a fantastic demonstration of her snorkeling technique, just looking under the water for anything that can't swim away. So scavenging fish is going to be an important way for bears to gain calories at this time of the year. And you can see that she just picked up a dead salmon. And again, if you're hearing any clicking, those are just camera shutters from other people who are standing on the platform with me. The lighting right now is pretty nice to photograph these bears eating fish in the water. If you're not familiar with the type of fish that this bear is eating, these are primarily sockeye salmon that they're scavenging near the mouth of Brooks River. And this is the time of the year where the salmon really are peaking in their spawning activity. So sockeye salmon are born in freshwater, they go to the ocean, they come back to spawn and to die. So these fish will not return to the ocean. Once they spawn, that's it. They can only reproduce once. So that's an important distinction in their life history compared to a lot of other species of fish. So bears at this time of the year, they can look through the lower Brooks River in the clear water, look under the water for anything that can't swim away when the visibility is less, and maybe it's a bit more turbid. They can't see as well. They will also fish in the water by feel. They'll just walk along, try to feel with their paws. And she ate only half of that fish, so she left some of the rougher parts for other scavengers. Again, a very experienced bear, very efficient at catching fish in this area. So she knows where to go. She's moving out of our line of sight right now. I don't want to pan too far in that direction because we'll just see the back of everyone's heads, which is okay. It happens. I am sharing a public space. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what that might look like. Bears like 409 right now are spending the majority of their time, especially the more mature adults are spending the majority of their time fishing for salmon. This is the time of the year where they're going through a phase called hyperphagia, and that basically just means excessive eating. They need to eat as much as they can before they go into their dens. And their denning season will start to come up here in October. Some may enter the dens as early as maybe mid-October or late October. Probably most of them will go into their dens a little bit later than that. They'll probably start to enter their dens and hibernate in November. But the majority of their waking hours at this, for most of the bears at this time of the year, is spent in the search of food. And if they're not feeding in the river, then they're sleeping. In fact, the bears that we can see as little dots out there in the water right now, these are part of a family. And let me make sure that they're all in frame. Here we are. So there's one bear on the left, and again, they kind of look like dots, just right across the middle of your screen from left to right. We have a mother bear somewhat blonde fur, somewhat blonde ears, and then she has 2 yearling cubs that are in the water near her. And they have somewhat recently woken from a long nap. And again, just went kind of straight into the water and started fishing. The cubs may have nursed during that time. We heard some bawling from the cubs before. And that's, when the cubs bawl, they want food from mother. Sometimes they'll do it because mother has salmon that she's not willing to share. In other instances, that is, a vocalization that they want to nurse. And sometimes the mother will concede and lay down and allow those cubs to nurse. Oftentimes she ignores their cries. Now, and this is about as far as I can zoom in, but a little bit of play going on. So these are well-fed bears. Like I said, the majority of their time is going to be spent in the search for food. But they will find a little bit of time, I guess you could say, for some recreation. Some other bears will play with their cubs extensively. Not all will, but each one of these bears is very individual in their own way. And that noise you're hearing is an airplane that's coming into land. Or taking off. This gives you these sounds that you're hearing from the mouth of Brooks River gives you an indication of what the activity here is really like, because there's a lot of people going back and forth from where I'm standing across the river towards the lodge. Planes coming in and landing. So again, in national parks, this is an area where people and wildlife try to coexist as best as possible, but it's a very challenging place to do that because the habitat is so important for brown bears. So park rangers are always challenged to make sure that they're trying to give wildlife as much space to access the resources they need to survive. Now 435 Holly out here, interestingly enough, she is a bear that's fairly habituated to the presence of people. And what I mean by habituated is that she's just used to our presence. So she's much less likely than some other bears to avoid this area because of people. But there are certainly bears in this area that will only come out maybe at dawn and dusk during hours when people are less active, we're quieter. So some bears have learned to sort of adapt to our presence in the area. And that doesn't mean you can necessarily be close to these bears and be safe. But again, it shows the individuality of these animals and how some are able to exploit, these niches that maybe not all bears have the same access to. There are just other bears, for whatever reason, maybe it's in their genes, maybe they had a bad experience with people in the past that just never really learned to tolerate the presence of people or our noise or equipment that well. But 435 Holly certainly is one of those bears. So she's again on the left with her blonder cub. The one on the right is a bit darker, and it seems like it's been enjoying some salmon. So cubs learn a lot of lessons from their mother. Not only, maybe where to find denning sites, but of course where to find food. Since she brought these cubs here last year as first-year cubs and bringing them back again this year, it's very likely that they'll remember that this is a good place to fish, and we could see them here as independent bears next year. Based on her track record of raising offspring, I do expect that these bears will, or these yearlings will be on their own next year. Holly seems to be a bear that raises her cubs through 2 summers, and they'll go to the den all together as a family this winter. But at the beginning of their 3rd summer, she emancipates or separates from her cubs. So the lessons that these bears are learning from their mother this year will have to be applied next year. They, again, most likely will not have mom to watch over them and provide for them. And it's a stage of life that all bears have to go through, but I'm sure it's quite a shocking experience at first, all of a sudden to find yourself wandering alone without the protection of your mother and the guidance of your mother. But we also see these young bears showing more and more independence as they age. In fact, these yearlings are likely to sometimes wander away from Holly. Not that far, but they will sometimes wander away, investigate other things. They will occasionally approach other bears, smaller bears, realizing that, hey, mom is nearby. I think if I get into trouble, then she'll be able to back me up and maybe get me out of a bind if I run into it. So that certainly happens with older cubs, yearlings, 2.5-year-olds. In fact, the dark one of this litter seems to be quite assertive. Both of her cubs are females as far as I know, but she tends, the one on the right, tends to be quite assertive and is more willing to approach other bears, especially more likely to do that than her blonder sibling. And again, if you're just joining us in the broadcast right now, my name is Mike Fitz. I'm a fellow with Explore.org. I'm very glad that you were able to join me on this beautiful afternoon here at Brooks River in Katmai National Park. We had a very foggy morning here this morning, and that layer of clouds that sort of formed overnight has lifted, and now it's a crystal clear day. September is one of the most beautiful times of the year to visit Brooks River because all the colors are changing on the trees. There's a lot of spawning salmon in the water that sort of sparkle like rubies when the light is right. And of course, many fat bears around. And during this play-by-play broadcast, I will be quiet from time to time as I look around for other bears that may be swimming through the area or anything else that might catch my attention.
Okay, so this one has a camera too. There's a camera here, and on the other platform over here, but this is the lower platform. Okay, further up the trail. Yeah, we were on that one.
It was quite busy here with bears not that long ago. Of course, right before I started the broadcast, there were many bears, including at least 3 family groups in the area, but only this group of bears, I think, within my line of sight right now. And since they're somewhat stationary, I'm going to pan away from them for just a moment. Let's see if we can take a look at some salmon in the water. At this time of the day, with the light at my back from where I'm standing, we might be able to get a view of them. So down in the water here may look like just some dark spots in your view, but those are all sockeye salmon in the water. And let's zoom in and see what that looks like when we get a little bit closer. The glare in the water might make it difficult to see, but I think you'll be able to see some of these fish in the water. These fish have not yet spawned, so these are fish that are staging here. They're waiting for the right time to move upriver to spawn, and most of them won't move very far upriver. They might move within, a quarter mile, probably just to Brooks Falls, which is about a half mile from where I am at most. So the salmon here at Brooks River, they begin to arrive in June, and most of those early arrivals will keep on going. They'll jump the falls, they'll swim through the river, they'll go into the tributaries of Lake Brooks, and they may have, after they jump the falls, they may have, close to 20 miles of swimming to do before they reach their spawning site. These fish don't have nearly as far to go, but they've been here for a long while. They may have arrived in in the middle of July or early July and have just been waiting for the right time. So they're staging down here. Occasionally we might, if you look closely, you might see one turn on its side and sort of fan the gravel, and that's how they dig their nests. But the water level here in the wintertime drops quite dramatically near the river mouth because the lake level drops. So not a lot of spawning here, but the salmon seem to really know that if they spawn right in this area, especially if they get close to the river edge, that it will eventually be exposed in the wintertime, and their eggs will not survive that. So they're really, really good at using their instincts to determine where good places are to spawn. There's also more sediment down here because the river current isn't nearly as strong, so it's harder for them to, when they dig their nest, to kind of winnow away the gravel on the river bottom. Because if there's too much silt in the water or mud or something like that, then that will suffocate their eggs. But I love watching the fish here. It's really a beautiful scene, and these fish are the keystone of the ecosystem. They are the reason why Brooks River is such a productive place, why it's so attractive to bears and people, why it's been attractive to people for thousands of years. And this is a place where the salmon runs have been consistently large over the past 50 years, especially the last 30 to 40 years. So that's really helped to support high numbers of brown bears in this area. And just an overall high productivity in the ecosystem. The fish are really like conveyor belts. Because when they're born, I mean, they're very small. They're only a few millimeters long. Even when they go to the ocean after spending 1 to 2 years in freshwater, they only weigh a few grams. But when they come back, they're going to weigh, this species anyway, is going to weigh 4 to 7 pounds. Sometimes more, depending on how long they spend in the ocean. So it's almost like, in a way, the ecosystem is farming the ocean. They're kind of giving they're sowing the seeds here by allowing the fish to grow or hatch and grow for just a couple of years, and then they send them out to the ocean to get big and come back and bring back all that profit and energy and fertilizer, especially into the ecosystem. This certainly would be an impoverished place without salmon.
What's nice is because it's been a day not so long, but to see them
And when I say impoverished, I do mean for the people in this area who live here, certainly that would mean an economic hardship for them. But ecologically too, this would be an ecologically impoverished place without salmon. We would still have brown bears. We would still have, the same types of birds. We would still have the same types of plants, but none of the things would grow as rapidly or grow as abundantly. We just have another bear moving into our line of sight right now. And this one, don't quite recognize, but that's okay. It happens sometimes. I will be, and I've done that during the broadcast so far. I've informed you of certain nicknames and numbers of a lot of these bears. And if you're not familiar with these individual animals, just go to Katmai's website, download the Bears of Brooks River. It's a guide to their identification, lives, and habits. So it's an excellent book that will help you identify a lot of the individual bears that you can see on the bear cams. That's one of the things that makes watching bears here unique, is that we get to know these animals as individuals, and not just over a single year, but over multiple years. And in fact, with some bears, maybe over their entire lives. But this is not a very large bear. I know when you are watching this on the cams, there's not really a good frame of reference to judge its size. But the very largest of the males will have thicker necks, wider heads typically than this bear. And we have new bears arriving at the river on a daily basis at this time of the year. In fact, the peak of the bear activity here really won't reach its apex until the end of the month, and sometimes the first week of October. So as the salmon run kind of plays out in different areas, this is probably where we're going to find the most, or where bears can find the most salmon that are still available. Bears might move up into the mountains right now to feed on berries. That's an important resource for them here at this time of the year. And berries give them different nutrients than salmon, so a bear really can't survive on salmon alone. But when you're looking at a caloric reward on a per pound basis and ease of access to food, certainly salmon is where it's at for these animals. So slow-moving animals, snorkeling in the water, very typical behavior. This is a classic September scene here at Brooks River. We're just about halfway through this broadcast. Again, if you're tuning in late, my name is Mike Fitz. I'm a fellow with Explore.org. I'm also a former park ranger here at Katmai National Park. And I am broadcasting live from Brooks River in Katmai. This is about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage, Alaska. And you can't access this place by driving in. You must take a plane or a boat to access Brooks River. And it's one of the best places in the world to watch brown bears. This is a special year for Katmai. It's the 100th anniversary of Katmai National Monument. And Katmai was originally established to protect and preserve its scientific and scenic resources associated with the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. But now it is more famous for its brown bears. In fact, it's become, I think, a more significant place because it's recognized for more than just volcanoes. Human history, wilderness, its wildlife. And I'm not sure if you're able to really see that fish all that well in the bear's paws. That's about as far as the camera will zoom in. But the color of the fish at this time of the year indicates whether or not it has really spawned. The pink flesh that you get when you buy a sockeye salmon from the store is caused by a lot of course, pigments, carotenoids. It's kind of the same stuff that gives carrots their orange color. But as they attain their spawning colors, those pigments are transferred from the flesh to their skin. So spawned out fish have very pale colored flesh, sometimes almost white. And occasionally on the cams, when you get a really good view of a fish that a salmon or that a bear is eating, you can tell whether or not it's a fish that has already spawned just by looking at the color of the flesh. If it looks really, really pale, it's probably a fish that has already completed its life's journey. while we have a quiet moment here, I'm going to just leave this scene in view. Just a little bit of a wide scene of the lower Brooks River. Every once in a while, you're going to see a fish break the surface. Maybe just porpoise up to the top, or maybe jump completely out of the water. And those are salmon doing that. They're not trout necessarily coming up to the surface to feed on insects or anything like that. The trout in this area will feed on insects, aquatic insects, but this is the time of the year where they're primarily feeding on salmon eggs. In fact, just like the bears, they're getting fat on salmon. And a lot of people will come to Katmai. Katmai, in this area, is fairly world famous for its sport fishing opportunities, especially for rainbow trout. And in Brooks River, there can be 30-inch rainbow trout, and all homegrown wild fish. In the springtime, they feed on salmon fry. When the salmon mature into smolt and they run out to sea, they'll try to catch the smolt. And at this time of the year, any eggs that don't get captured in a nest and they drift downstream, the fish will feed very heavily on those. And then in the wintertime, they may not be doing nearly as much feeding. They may be kind of losing weight during that time, because there's not as much food available to them. So just like the bears, the predatory fish in this water here, like rainbow trout and Arctic char, and even little tiny fish like sculpins. We have some species of sculpin here that are only a few inches long, and their mouths are just big enough to eat a salmon egg. These are all fish that are highly dependent on the return of salmon each year. But the jumping that the salmon do, why they would do that right now, that remains a mystery. No one's actually sure. It may be that they get agitated, just being in a school. There's a bunch of different ideas. Some people say that their hormonal changes that they're undertaking right now is just really, really intense. These fish, just basically went through the human equivalent of puberty. They weren't, considered adults until they got back here. They didn't have, functioning sexual organs at that time. They didn't have mature eggs. They didn't have, any milk to release if you're a male. So that transition can happen quite rapidly. And so that's another idea of why they might be jumping. It's just like their hormones are going nuts, and every once in a while they have this burst of energy. Other theories revolve around whether or not they are ridding their skin of parasites, maybe external parasites. And there was one study that was published recently from British Columbia on sockeye salmon that demonstrated that in juvenile salmon. So juvenile salmon in the ocean will jump to try to rid their skin of sea lice. And sea lice are just small crustaceans. They're little copepods. But as far as I know, sea lice aren't able to survive in fresh water. So since these fish have been back for so long, I'm not sure that would really explain why they are jumping. While I'm looking around, this is actually a bear-free view for the moment. I'm swiveling my head back and forth. It comes and goes here as far as bear activity at the mouth of Brooks River. Sometimes the stars align and there's just many that come into the vicinity. And sometimes they go up into the forest and rest, especially after a big meal. if you want to see a lot of bears on the lower river cameras, I think sometimes the best time of the day to look for them is certainly the morning, local time here, and sunrise is kind of close to 8 a.m. right now, 8:30-ish. Just like us, they get hungry in the morning and they want to make sure that they can start filling their bellies. The salmon will continue to spawn throughout the night, so they'll be spawning, they'll be dying, they'll be drifting downstream. And I often wonder if that, knowing that sort of in a way attracts bears down into this area. Maybe they don't know that the salmon continue to spawn overnight, but they know that there might be a lot of dead fish here, or at least a lot more dead fish available in the morning hours. They will be active at all hours, but they generally tend to be less active during the dark of the night. There are bears in the vicinity. I can hear on one of the park radios that that's the case. So maybe some will come back into our line of sight here shortly. I'm going to try to catch this one before it drifts out of our line of sight. This is an example of a spawned out salmon that the bears will be looking for. So again, that's a fish that's either, it looks like it's trying to swim just a little bit, but it's in its last gasps. And it doesn't have much longer to survive. All those white spots on it were fungus. The fish are not concerned with healing their bodies, only migrating and spawning. So any injuries or wounds that they receive can be infected very easily. They get any of the protective slime that they have on them. If that gets rubbed off, they won't replace that, and it will allow pathogens and fungus to take hold very quickly. It's not uncommon to find the salmon with fungus on them or very big wounds at this time of the year, and it's kind of remarkable how tough they are in the face of that. Even when they're digging their nests, I mean, they really do sacrifice a lot of their bodies to make sure that they reproduce. Spawned out females almost have no tail fins left over after they dig their nest. And they just don't dig one nest, they'll dig a series of nests and release maybe about 1,000 eggs in each. And they might have like 3,000 to 4,000 eggs in each female. Bigger females can have more eggs. But when they're done spawning, their tails are worn down to almost nubs. You can imagine trying to dig basically a depression in the gravel here without a shovel, and how hard that would be on your hands if you tried it with your hands. So they have no tools, no shovels, nothing like that that really is specialized for digging. The only tool that they really have is their tail. Males have a difficult time during the spawning period as well. They're not physically digging nests, but they're defending their access to females. So males will pair up with females, and they will chase away other males who come nearby. And females will also have the additional duty not only of digging nests, but they will have to defend their nesting site from other females. You come into the river, you find a good spot to spawn, another female might want to spawn in that same place. And of course you don't want her coming in and digging up your eggs. So she will hang around her nesting site as much as her energy allows. So after she's done laying her eggs, she'll bury them in the gravel once again with her tail, stick around, defend that nesting site as long as possible. But once they lay their eggs, they only really have about a week to live at most. And I think that salmon that we looked at drifting downstream just a moment ago didn't make it very far, and now it's just kind of waiting on the bottom of the river for a bear to come by. So again, bears at this time of the year, you're wondering, what are they looking for? This is it. They will take, they'd rather eat fresher fish, because fresher fish have more calories in them. I presume it probably tastes better as well. I don't know that for sure. Each bear probably has an individual palate, just like people. But energy-wise, I mean, that's probably their main motivator for looking for fresher fish. But they have to balance, any calorie expenditure with calorie intake. So really, just think about the economics of their lives. They need to make, break even each year in profit and calories. And during the summertime is really their season for making profit and calories, because they don't eat while they're in the den. They don't drink. So they're surviving solely on their body fat for not only energy to keep them warm, but also for hydration too. So moving through the water, moving through this area very slowly, looking for dead salmon on the bottom doesn't cost them a lot of energy, and it allows them to gain a lot of energy. Even if these fish, are spawned out, aren't as rich in calories as one fresh from the sea, it's still very easy for them to make a profit. In fact, over a couple of hours just of scavenging, really skilled bears in this area, experienced bears, can easily pick up and eat 30 of these dead and dying salmon. Even a minimal estimate of, 1,000 calories, which would be a very minimal estimate for a spawned out fish. You eat 30 of those, you can still have 30,000 calories in a day. That's a fairly good day for a bear. The bear that was upstream has moved back into our line of sight, so maybe we'll look in that direction. Still doing its thing, so again, a lot of those behaviors that I talked about. Being efficient, looking for anything that can't swim away. This bear is certainly demonstrating. So we looked at this bear maybe 15 minutes ago, and this is all the farther it has gotten. So very slow moving. So the water depth varies a little bit where this bear is. Of course, it's shallow where the grass is able to grow. It can be deeper through the main channel areas. That can hinder some bears from scavenging salmon, the deeper water, because not all bears know how to dive. Most of them just kind of try to reach down with their legs to pick up any fish. But a few of the bears have learned to dive in the water, fully submerge themselves. For whatever reason, though, and we don't know why, but most bears seem to want to keep their ears dry. If they stick their faces in the water, it's just up to their eyebrows. And they always seem to, most of them seem to keep their ears above the water.
The sensor's actually not bad. It's the same sensor as the Nikon T500.
Currently, this is the only bear that I have within my line of sight. So again, I'm swiveling my head from time to time, looking around. So here's a fish that this bear caught that it didn't have to work very hard for. Again, just moving extremely slowly through the water. Some of those barely live fish will drift right into them. Or this could have been a fish that was laying on the bottom. And as I look around in the river bottom from where I'm standing, I can see several dead fish that haven't been captured or eaten. There's also partially eaten fish, so there's fish heads in a variety of places. And those will likely be picked up by other bears shortly. And I'm going to try sticking with you for another 10 minutes. Again, my name is Mike Fitz. I'm a fellow with Explore.org. I'm also a former park ranger here in Katmai National Park, Alaska. This is one of the best times of the year to visit Brooks River to see brown bears fishing for salmon. The activity is different depending on the time of the year here and also the location. In fact, you'll still see bears waiting for migrating salmon up at Brooks Falls. So if you tune in to the Brooks Falls cam, you're going to see bears standing around a lot waiting for fish to come to them. And those are more vigorous fish. They haven't spawned yet. They're maybe trying to migrate to their spawning site. And the bears down here are not looking to chase those moving fish. They know that it's not a worthwhile proposition. Again, going back to that idea of being efficient with your energy, making sure that you can make a profit in calories during the summer. So it's just not worth their while to chase fish through the water here. They would expend a lot of energy and probably would not be very successful in most instances, especially at this time of the year when the water is very deep. So moving slowly, scavenging, snorkeling by sticking their face in the water, this is definitely the most efficient way to eat the fish and find it. Beautiful view of Dumpling Mountain. Dumpling Mountain tops out about 2,440 feet in elevation. Where I'm standing, I'm only about 60 feet above sea level. But I am about 60 water miles from salt water. So when the salmon are swimming out of Bristol Bay into the Naknek River and into Naknek Lake, through that whole journey, they have about 60 miles before they can get to this spot. But not a significant amount of elevation to gain during that time. That's not the case for other salmon runs in different parts of Katmai. In some places, they will spawn in areas that are over 2,000 feet in elevation, especially up in Katmai National Preserve. Hungrier, less sleepy bears are going to eat their salmon a little quicker than this one. Again, very typical scene for this time of the year. Moving through very slowly, finding a fish, selecting the most tasty and caloric parts of that fish. And I tried to identify some of the bears that I saw before. But this is that bear that I was not able to recognize immediately. Its face does look like an awful lot like an adult female that we saw at Brooks Falls in July, but I could be quite mistaken about that too. So I try to watch these bears as much as I can. During my off time, I try to just shove a sandwich in my face and head right out to the river so I can do some bear watching. But there are bears that I see frequently that I don't know who they might be. They could be completely new bears to the area, or they could just be bears that I don't recognize. We're seeing a very small subset of bears here in Katmai. The last population estimate for the park was about 2,200 bears, and that was done in 2007. And at that time, there were maybe about 100 brown bears, individual brown bears that were identified using the river throughout that summer. So again, this is a very significant resource for the area's brown bears, but certainly there are a lot of other bears in the park that are making a living without visiting Brooks River. But it means a lot to the bears that are here. This is the place that they know where they can find food, and if they were displaced from this area, then they may have a hard time initially, establishing a home range where they can find different food resources. So Katmai is certainly a big place. It's of diverse habitats, lots of food. But this, again, for these brown bears here, it is a very, very important resource for them. The river does not have a lot of energy in this area. So the gradient is not very steep at all. And in fact, that's why there's so many meanders and side channels here, little eddies. And that's why the salmon collect here, the dead salmon, in such large numbers, including out in the mouth of the river. And here's a fish that just finished spawning. It's swimming downstream. I'll see if I can get it in view before it goes under the bridge again. You can see how beat up it looks. Very yellowed tail, yellowed dorsal fin, spotted from fungus as it disappears under the bridge. And that's a fish that probably tried to maintain its hold on its spawning site for as long as it could, but its energy eventually just gave out, and it's swimming with the current. And that is not something that the more energetic fish will do. They will always face upstream. So that is a fish that also does not have long to live, and it could be a fish that a bear finds very shortly in the mouth of the river as it maybe drops to the bottom or floats on the surface. I'd like to thank you for joining me on this broadcast this afternoon. It's a beautiful afternoon from Brooks River. This is certainly a time of the year where we see the wildlife demonstrating efficiency as much as possible. I think that's one of the things that I noticed about this afternoon. You can see the salmon in the water, staging in an area where it's easy for them to evade predators, and they don't have to work very hard to stay in the current. We've seen a lot of bears moving through this area, especially at the beginning of the broadcast, being efficient with their fishing techniques, making sure that they're not expending extra energy to find these fish, because this is a critical feeding time of the year for the brown bears as they try to put on as many calories as they can before they go into hibernation. Even the scavenging birds are hanging around, not moving very rapidly, just waiting for easy meals to drift their way. And most of the time that's going to be salmon. It's going to be salmon for the magpies, the gulls, bald eagles, ravens, even sometimes songbirds I've seen picking up little bits of dead fish on the riverbank. So the signs of fall are definitely here, and that means efficiency for a lot of these species. If you want to learn more about the brown bears here at Katmai National Park, please tune in to the bear cams on explore.org. Please visit Katmai National Park's website, nps.gov/KATM, for many additional resources. And tomorrow morning, September 14th at 9 a.m. Alaska time, 10 a.m. Pacific, and I'm not going to do all the time zones in North America, so I don't mess them up. But I will be on the Brooks River live chat channel on explore.org in the comments. I won't be on video, but I will be in the comments answering your questions there, along with another Katmai National Park ranger. So if you have questions for me, please join me then, and I'll do my best to try to answer those for you. But again, thanks for joining me this afternoon, and enjoy this beautiful day here at Brooks River with me.